Zekthara's four eyes still twitched when he thought about that day. The day everything changed. The day his people learned they had made the biggest mistake in galactic history. He was young then, barely past his second molting, working as a junior analyst in the Valkorian Intelligence Division. The massive space station orbited the sixth planet of the Turval system, a gleaming monument to Valkorian power that had stood for 300 years. From his small office on level 47, Zekthara processed reports from across the galaxy, cataloging threats and opportunities for the hegemony. Most of his work was routine. Pirates near the outer rim, trade disputes between minor species, the occasional territorial squabble that required a show of force. Nothing that truly challenged Valkorian supremacy. They were the most advanced civilization in known space, masters of plasma technology and quantum engineering. Their fleets numbered in the thousands. Their territory spanned dozens of star systems, and their military had never known defeat. Then came the report about Earth. Zekthara remembered unrolling the FO datapad that morning, expecting another boring survey of some backwater world. Instead, he found something that made his mandibles click with amusement. A species called humans had just developed faster-than-light communication. They were sending crude radio signals into space, apparently trying to contact other civilizations. Preliminary scans were almost laughable. Earth was a single planet with no colonies, no orbital defenses, and technology that was centuries behind galactic standards. Their fastest ships still used chemical rockets. Their weapons were projectile-based, slug throwers and primitive explosives. They hadn't even mastered fusion power beyond basic energy generation. But what caught the attention of Valkorian High Command wasn't Earth's primitive technology. It was the planet's resources. Long-range surveys had detected massive deposits of rare minerals, particularly trilithium and quantum crystals, that were essential for advanced starship construction. Earth's location was also strategically valuable, sitting at the junction of three major hyperspace routes. Admiral Vorainak himself had reviewed the report. Zekthara still remembered the meeting where the old warrior had dismissed human capabilities with a wave of his massive claw. Barely evolved primates, he had called them. They play with toys they don't understand. We will offer them the honor of joining the hegemony. If they refuse, we will take what we need. 3 months later, the first human ship arrived at Turval Station. Zekthara was assigned to the diplomatic reception team, partly because of his expertise in xenobiology, and partly because junior analysts got all the boring jobs. He stood in the docking bay with a dozen other officials, watching as the alien vessel slowly maneuvered toward the landing platform. The ship was ugly by Valkorian standards, where their vessels were sleek and organic-looking, curved like the shells of their ancestors. The human craft was all angles and harsh lines. It looked more like a flying building than a starship. The hull was covered in strange markings and symbols that their translation computers were still trying to decode. But despite its crude appearance, the ship handled beautifully. The pilot brought it in with smooth, confident movements that spoke of real skill. As the landing clamps engaged and the airlock sealed, Zekthara felt his first hint of unease. Maybe these humans weren't quite as primitive as everyone thought. The airlock cycled open with a hiss of equalizing atmosphere. 3 figures emerged, walking with purpose across the metal deck. They were smaller than Valkorians, bipedal creatures with soft skin and strange fur on their heads. But they moved with a confidence that seemed out of place for representatives of such a primitive world. The leader was a male called Captain John Martinez. He wore a blue uniform with metal decorations that clinked softly as he walked. His eyes were dark and alert, constantly scanning the docking bay with the same intensity that a predator might use to study hunting grounds. When he spoke, his voice was calm and controlled, but there was something underneath it that made Zicthara's skin crawl. "Greetings," Captain Martinez said in surprisingly good galactic standard. "I am Captain John Martinez of the Earth Confederation. Ship Liberty. This is Ambassador Lisa Wong and Commander Jake Sullivan. We come in peace, seeking friendship and trade between our peoples." Ambassador Wong stepped forward with a diplomatic smile. She was smaller than the captain, with black hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She carried herself with the grace of someone used to high-stakes negotiations, speaking in careful, measured tones about cooperation and mutual benefit. But it was the third human who worried Zecthara the most. Commander Sullivan stood slightly behind the others, saying little but watching everything. His uniform was different from the others, darker and with fewer decorations. While the captain and ambassador focused on the Valkorian officials, Sullivan's attention wandered to the docking bay's security cameras, the placement of the guards, and the access corridors leading deeper into the station. The formal greetings took place in Conference Room 7, a grand chamber designed to impress visiting dignitaries. The walls were made of polished crystal that showed swirling patterns of light, and the ceiling displayed a real-time view of the stars outside. Admiral Voronak presided from the head of a crescent-shaped table, his massive frame draped in the ceremonial robes of his rank. Zecthara sat in the back row with the other junior staff, taking notes and trying to look invisible. He watched as Ambassador Wong presented gifts from Earth. There were pieces of art, samples of human music, and data files containing scientific information. The ambassador spoke eloquently about the benefits of cultural exchange and peaceful coexistence, but Zecthara found himself studying Captain Martinez instead. The human's eyes never stopped moving. While his ambassador talked about peace, the captain was memorizing the room's layout, counting the guards, and noting the positions of every door and window. It was the behavior of someone who thought like a soldier, even in a diplomatic setting. Commander Sullivan was even more concerning. He had brought a small device that he claimed was a cultural exchange terminal, designed to share information about human history and technology. But Zicthara noticed that the device seemed to be doing more listening than sharing. Its sensors were quietly recording everything from room dimensions to the electromagnetic signatures of Valkorian equipment. The negotiations continued for 3 days. The humans were polite, patient, and surprisingly well-informed about galactic politics. They asked intelligent questions about trade routes, diplomatic protocols, and legal frameworks. Ambassador Wong seemed genuinely interested in establishing peaceful relations between Earth and the hegemony, but there were little things that bothered Zecthara. The way Captain Martinez always positioned himself near an exit. How Commander Sullivan's questions often focused on military topics, disguised as innocent curiosity about Valkorian history. The fact that all 3 humans carried small communication devices that they used to send regular reports back to their ship. On the final day, Admiral Voronak made his offer. The Valkorian hegemony would be pleased to welcome Earth as a protectorate. World. Humans would be granted limited self-governance in exchange for mining rights and strategic cooperation. It was a generous offer by galactic standards, the same deal offered to dozens of other primitive species. Ambassador Wong listened politely, asked for time to consult with her government, and promised a response within 6 months. The humans departed with the same quiet confidence they had shown upon arrival, leaving behind their gifts and taking with them detailed records of everything they had seen and heard. As their ship disappeared into hyperspace, Zecthara felt an odd sense of relief. There had been something unsettling about the human delegation, something that didn't match their reputation as a primitive species. But they were gone now, and life on Turval Station returned to normal. 6 months later, Earth's response arrived. It was polite but firm. Humanity declined the hegemony's offer of protection, preferring to remain independent. They thanked the Valkorians for their hospitality and hoped that peaceful relations could continue despite this disagreement. Admiral Voronok was not pleased. Within a week, the Valkorian High Command had voted to claim Earth by force. After all, what could one primitive planet do against the most powerful military in the galaxy? Zekthara would spend the next 3 years learning exactly what humans could do when they were threatened. And he would never forget the lesson. Zekthara still felt sick when he remembered the day the war began. He had been promoted to senior analyst after correctly predicting the outcome of 3 minor conflicts in the Outer Rim. His new office had a better view of space and access to classified intelligence reports. He thought he understood how wars worked. The Valkorian hegemony declared war on Earth on a Tuesday morning. Admiral Voronok made the announcement from the bridge of his flagship, the crushing victory. The message was broadcast across all frequencies, both as a warning to humanity and as a demonstration to other species who might consider defying Valkorian authority. The primitive world known as Earth has rejected our generous offer of protection. Admiral Voronok announced, his voice heavy with authority. They have chosen isolation over cooperation, ignorance over wisdom. We will now claim what is rightfully ours by force. This action will serve as a lesson to all who would dare oppose the natural order of galactic civilization. Zekthara watched. The announcement from the intelligence center, surrounded by dozens of other analysts and officers. Everyone seemed confident about the outcome. Earth had no orbital defenses, no fleet worth mentioning, and technology that was centuries behind. Galactic standards. The betting pools gave the war 3 weeks at most, but the human response changed. Everything. Instead of panic or desperate diplomatic messages, Earth's first action was to recall every human ship in known space. Merchant vessels, research ships, and the few military craft they possessed all began racing back toward their home system. At the same time, every human colony and outpost went silent, cutting all communication with the outside galaxy. They are preparing to surrender, suggested Commander Valtar, one of the senior intelligence officers. No doubt they are gathering their leadership to negotiate terms. Zekthara wasn't so sure. He had been studying the reports from human space, trying to understand what was happening behind the communication blackout. The few long-range sensors that could penetrate human territory were picking up massive energy signatures and industrial activity on a scale that seemed impossible for such a primitive civilization. 3 weeks after the war declaration, the first Valkorian scout ships reached the outer edge of the Sol system. What they found defied every expectation. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter had been turned into a fortress. Every significant rock now bristled with weapons platforms, shield, generators, and sensor arrays. The construction was crude by Valkorian standards, but there was so much of it. Thousands of defensive positions, all connected by a network of supply tunnels and communication lines. The gas giant Jupiter itself had become a shipyard. Orbital platforms surrounded the planet like metal moons, each one launching newly constructed vessels at an impossible rate. The ships were angular and ugly, built for function rather than beauty, but they were being produced faster than anything in Valkorian experience. Commander Helen Brooks was apparently in charge of the outer system. Defenses. Intelligence reports described her as a former transport pilot who had been promoted to military command when the war began. She broadcasted a simple message to the approaching Valkorian scouts. Turn around and go home. This is your only warning. Admiral Voronok laughed when he heard the transmission. A single primitive world threatening the greatest fleet in galactic history seemed like a joke. He ordered his advance forces to sweep aside the human defenses and proceed toward Earth. The Battle of Europa changed everything. Europa was one of Jupiter's moons, now converted into a massive military base. The Valkorian attack began at dawn. Ship time, with a standard bombardment designed to soften defensive positions. Plasma cannons and particle beams lanced out from the fleet, striking what appeared to be the main command center, but the humans had learned about Valkorian tactics. During their diplomatic visit 6 months earlier, Commander Sullivan's cultural exchange device had recorded everything from weapon signatures to tactical doctrines. When the bombardment ended and the Valkorian assault ships moved in, they found only empty bunkers and automated decoys. Real defense came from unexpected directions. Human ships emerged from behind asteroids, from the shadow of Jupiter's other moons, and even from inside the gas giant's atmosphere itself. They attacked in small groups, hitting the Valkorian formation from multiple angles before disappearing back into cover. Captain Ben Carter commanded one of the human vessels, a ship called Terra's Wrath. It was smaller than any Valkorian destroyer, armed with primitive kinetic weapons and simple missile systems. But Carter used it like a surgeon's blade, striking at weak points in the enemy formation before vanishing into the asteroid field. The Valkorian fleet found itself fighting an enemy that refused to engage in proper naval combat. Instead of lining up for a traditional battle, the humans darted in and out of cover like insects, stinging repeatedly before retreating. Their weapons were weaker than Valkorian plasma cannons, but they seemed to know exactly where to hit for maximum damage. General Carl White coordinated the overall defense from a hidden command center deep inside Europa. Intelligence intercepts revealed that he had been a logistics officer before the war, responsible for managing supply chains for human merchant fleets. Now he was using those same skills to coordinate a defensive network that stretched across the entire solar system. But the most shocking discovery came when Valkorian forces captured a damaged human ship. The technology inside was unlike anything they had expected. The computers were more advanced than initial scans had suggested, using quantum processing systems that rivaled Valkorian designs. The weapons, while simpler in concept, had been refined to incredible efficiency. Most disturbing was the evidence of rapid technological advancement. Components in the captured ship showed clear signs of being reverse-engineered from Valkorian technology. Somehow, the humans had taken sensor readings and equipment samples during their diplomatic visit and used them to upgrade their own systems in just 6 months. Dr. Lisa Kim was apparently in charge of human research and development. Intelligence. Reports described massive underground laboratories where human scientists worked around the clock to analyze and improve captured alien technology. They were not just copying Valkorian designs, but finding ways to make them better, cheaper, and easier to produce. The siege of Europa lasted for 6 days. Admiral Voronak threw wave after wave of ships at the human defenses, expecting each assault to break through. But the humans had prepared for exactly this kind of attack. Every approach was covered by overlapping fields of fire. Every weakness was protected by hidden gun emplacements. On the 7th day, Captain Carter made his final transmission. Terra's Wrath had been crippled by plasma fire, its engines failing and life support systems damaged beyond repair. Rather than surrender, Carter aimed his dying ship at the Valkorian flagship and pushed the engines to overload. "Every inch you take will cost you blood," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. "Every step toward Earth will be your last. We will make you pay for every meter of space, every drop of fuel, every moment you spend in our system. This is just the beginning." Terra's Wrath struck the crushing Victory shields at maximum velocity. The impact didn't destroy the flagship, but it sent a message that resonated through both fleets. The humans were not going to surrender. They were not going to negotiate. They were going to fight with everything they had, no matter the cost. Admiral Voronak ordered a tactical withdrawal to regroup and plan a new assault. As his battered fleet pulled back to the edge of the solar system, long-range sensors detected more human ships approaching from deeper in their territory. vessels that were larger and more advanced than anything they had faced at Europa. Zekthara studied the intelligence reports from his office on Turval Station, trying to understand what had gone wrong. The humans were supposed to be primitive. They were supposed to be weak and disorganized. Instead, they had transformed their entire civilization into a war machine in less than 6 months. But the most terrifying thing wasn't their technology or their tactics. It was their attitude. Other species fought wars to gain territory or resources. They understood concepts like acceptable losses and strategic withdrawal. The humans seemed to view war as something that had to be won completely, no matter what it cost. As more reports arrived from the Sol system, Zekthara began to realize that the Valkorian hegemony had made a terrible mistake. They hadn't declared war on a primitive species. They had awakened something that had been sleeping, something that understood violence in ways that no other civilization had ever imagined. The humans were learning. Every battle taught them something new about Valkorian tactics and technology. Every engagement made them stronger, smarter, and more dangerous. And they seemed to have an endless capacity for adaptation and improvement. Admiral Voranuk was already requesting reinforcements, calling for the largest fleet in Valkorian history to crush human resistance once and for all. But Zekthara had a growing suspicion that more ships would not be enough. The humans had shown they could turn any disadvantage into a weapon, any weakness into a strength. The war was just beginning, and already it was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Zekthara's promotion to senior intelligence analyst came with access to classified reports that made his sleep cycles restless. The war had been going on for 18 months, and nothing was happening the way the Valkorian High Command had predicted. What should have been a quick conquest had turned into a nightmare that was spreading across multiple star systems. The humans had done something that no other species in galactic history had ever attempted. They refused to fight the kind of war that everyone expected. Instead of meeting Valkorian fleets in open battle, they had developed what their military called asymmetric warfare doctrine. It was a concept that made no sense to traditional military thinking. General Patricia Hayes led the Human Strategic Planning Division from a hidden base somewhere in the asteroid belt. Intelligence reports described her as a former university professor who had studied ancient Earth military history. Now she was applying lessons from primitive human conflicts to modern space warfare with terrifying effectiveness. The first major example came at the Battle of Proxima Station. The Valkorian Third Fleet had captured the human outpost after a brief siege, expecting to use it as a forward base for operations deeper into human space. Admiral Kethfor established his headquarters in the station's command center and began planning the next phase of the offensive. 3 days later, the station exploded. The humans had rigged every critical system with hidden explosives before evacuating, but they had done more than just plant bombs. They had studied Valkorian occupation procedures during previous conflicts and predicted exactly how the invading forces would use the captured facility. The explosions were timed to cause maximum damage when the station was fully operational and crowded with enemy personnel. Admiral Kethfer and most of his senior staff died in the blast. The Third Fleet lost its command structure and had to withdraw to regroup. But the psychological impact was even worse than the tactical loss. Valkorian forces began to distrust every captured facility, every piece of human equipment, every system they thought they had secured. Colonel Nick Foster commanded the human special operations forces that carried out these deep strike missions. He had been a mining engineer before the war, familiar with explosives and underground construction. Now he led teams of specialists who could infiltrate enemy positions, plant charges in precisely calculated locations, and disappear before anyone knew they had been there. Doc Major Amy Chun served as Foster's second-in-command. coordinating intelligence gathering and target selection. She had studied Valkorian military doctrine during her time as a cultural attaché, learning their procedures and protocols. That knowledge now allowed her teams to predict enemy movements and strike at the most vulnerable moments. The Valkorian military had never faced an enemy that operated this way. Their traditional tactics assumed that conquered territory stayed conquered, that destroyed enemy forces stayed destroyed, that supply lines were safe once they were established. The humans ignored all of these assumptions. Lieutenant Commander Steve Johnson pioneered what became known as kinetic bombardment, using simple iron rods accelerated to incredible speeds. The concept was brutally simple. Take a dense metal projectile, accelerate it to a significant fraction of light speed, and let physics do the rest. The impact energy was equivalent to nuclear weapons, but the ammunition required no exotic materials or complex manufacturing. The first kinetic strike hit a Valkorian supply depot in the Kepler system. The depot was supposed to be safely behind the front lines, protected by patrol ships and defensive satellites. But Johnson's projectiles came in dark and silent, invisible to sensors until the moment of impact. The explosion was visible from orbit, and the shockwave shattered windows on the nearby space station. Dr. Rachel Kim led the development of adaptive, artificial intelligence systems that allowed human ships to operate in environments where Valkorian vessels couldn't function. Dense asteroid fields, ionized nebulae, and the turbulent space around pulsars became hiding places where human forces could strike without warning and vanish without a trace. But what truly frustrated Valkorian commanders was the human approach to technology and tactics. Other civilizations had thousands of years of military tradition that created rigid doctrines and established procedures. Humans had been in space for less than a century, which meant they had no preconceptions about what was possible or impossible in space warfare. When Valkorian ships proved superior in direct combat, humans built faster and more maneuverable vessels that avoided direct combat entirely. When enemy sensors could track conventional drives, humans developed new propulsion systems that left different energy signatures. When traditional weapons failed to penetrate Valkorian armor, humans created entirely new types of ammunition. See Thara. Read reports of human engineers who could redesign a ship's systems in hours, human pilots who could navigate through impossible terrain, human scientists who could solve problems that had stumped galactic civilization for centuries. It was as if the pressure of warfare had accelerated human development beyond all reasonable limits. The breaking point came when Admiral Tom Nelson assumed command of the newly formed human deep strike fleet. Nelson had been a cargo ship captain before the war, familiar with the commercial shipping lanes that connected different star systems. Now he used that knowledge to plan raids that struck at the very heart of Valkorian territory. The raid on the Vorhelm industrial complex was a masterpiece of planning and execution. The complex was located 12 jump points behind the front lines, protected by patrol fleets and early warning systems. It produced the quantum processors that powered Valkorian ship computers, making it one of the most important facilities in the entire hegemony. Nelson's fleet approached through a series of uninhabited systems, using gravitational slingshots around gas giants to build up speed while remaining hidden from long-range sensors. They emerged from hyperspace just outside the complex's defensive perimeter, moving too fast for the Guardian fleets to intercept. Captain Greg Miller commanded the assault ship Defiant Dawn, leading the attack on the primary manufacturing facility. His ship was smaller and less heavily armed than the Valkorian defenders, but it carried experimental weapons designed specifically for this mission. Plasma cutters that could slice through station hulls, electromagnetic pulse bombs that disabled computer systems, and kinetic penetrators that could punch through multiple levels of armor. Captain Linda Shaw led the Iron Resolve in a diversionary attack that drew the defensive fleet away from the main target. Her ship engaged 3 Valkorian cruisers simultaneously, using hit-and-run tactics to keep them busy while the primary assault proceeded. When her weapons were exhausted and her ship was badly damaged, she rammed the enemy flagship at maximum velocity. The entire operation lasted less than 2 hours. When it was over, the Vorhelm complex was a burning ruin, its production capacity destroyed for years to come. The economic impact rippled through the entire Valkorian war machine, forcing them to ration quantum processors and delay the construction of new ships. But the raid's real significance went beyond its immediate tactical results. Nelson's fleet had demonstrated that nowhere in Valkorian space was truly safe. If humans could strike at heavily defended industrial complexes deep behind enemy lines, they could strike anywhere. Commander Pete Williams coordinated the logistics that made these operations possible. He had managed supply chains for civilian transportation companies, ensuring that cargo reached its destination on schedule, despite mechanical failures, route changes, and unexpected delays. Now he applied the same skills to military operations, keeping human strike forces supplied and equipped, no matter how far they operated from their bases. The psychological warfare was just as important as the physical destruction. Valkorian forces began to see human saboteurs everywhere. Every system malfunction might be the result of human interference. Every equipment failure could be evidence of hidden infiltration. The paranoia spread through the ranks, making commanders second-guess their own decisions and distrust their own equipment. Thara found himself assigned to a special task force trying to understand human military psychology. The reports he read painted a picture of a species that approached warfare like a scientific problem to be solved. They analyzed every battle, studied every failure, and constantly refined their tactics based on new information. But the most disturbing aspect was their creativity. Where other species followed established military doctrines, humans invented new forms of warfare on the spot. They turned mining equipment into weapons, converted civilian technology into military applications, and found tactical uses for things that no military academy had ever considered. The war was entering its second year, and the Valkorian hegemony was facing something unprecedented in galactic history. They were losing to a species that should have been conquered in weeks. The humans were not just fighting back, they were winning. Admiral Varanak requested additional reinforcements, calling for the largest military mobilization in Valkorian history. But Zekthara had begun to suspect that more ships and weapons would not be enough. The humans were evolving too quickly, adapting too effectively, learning too much from every encounter. Zekthara would never forget the day Admiral Varanak announced Operation Final Victory. The old warrior stood before the assembled fleet commanders in the war room of his flagship, his massive frame casting shadows across the holographic display showing the Centauri system. After 2 years of setbacks and humiliating defeats, the Valkorian High Command had decided to end the human problem once and for all. "We have assembled the largest fleet in galactic history," Admiral Varanak declared, his voice echoing through the chamber. 3,000 ships from across the hegemony. Every class of vessel, from scout ships to heavy battle cruisers. The humans cannot possibly resist such overwhelming force. The target was Centauri Prime, a human colony world with nearly 2 million inhabitants. Intelligence reports suggested it was lightly defended, protected by only a small patrol fleet and basic orbital defenses. The plan was simple: surround the planet, demand surrender, and use the threat to civilian lives to force Earth into accepting Valkorian terms. Zekthara had been promoted again, this time to the intelligence staff, aboard the flagship itself. From his position in the command center, he could see the tactical displays showing the massive Valkorian formation as it approached the Centauri system. Ship after ship dropped out of hyperspace, taking positions around the human colony in a sphere of metal and weapons that stretched across millions of kilometers. The siege began exactly as planned. Admiral Voronak broadcast his ultimatum on all frequencies, demanding immediate surrender and threatening orbital bombardment if the colonists refused to comply. The human response came 12 hours later, transmitted from the planetary surface by someone identifying herself as Governor Kate Morrison. "We have received your demands," Governor Morrison said, her voice calm despite the impossible odds she faced. "The people of Centauri Prime vote to remain free. We will not surrender our world to foreign occupation. Do what you think you must." Admiral Voronak was furious at the rejection, but he held back from immediate retaliation. Destroying the colony would eliminate potential hostages and might provoke an even stronger response from Earth. Instead, he ordered the fleet to begin a systematic blockade, cutting off all supply lines and communications while preparing for a ground invasion. That was when Admiral Karen Wright arrived with the human relief fleet. The first sign of trouble came from the sensor operators on the outer perimeter. Long-range scanners detected hyperspace distortions at the edge of the system, indicating the approach of multiple vessels. The readings were confusing at first, showing energy signatures that didn't match any known human ship designs. Admiral Wright's fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, but something was wrong with their approach vector. Instead of heading directly toward the besieging forces, they took up positions near the system's asteroid belt and gas giant. Their ships were larger than previous human vessels, sleek and angular designs that looked more advanced than anything intelligence reports had predicted. The human admiral requested a communication channel, and her image appeared on the main display screen. Wright was an older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to look right through the camera. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had made difficult decisions and lived with the consequences. "Admiral Voronak," she said, using perfect galactic standard. "I am Admiral Karen Wright of the Terran Defense Force. You have 48 hours to withdraw your forces from this system. This is your only warning." The audacity of the statement drew laughter from several Valkorian officers. A human fleet numbering perhaps 300 ships was challenging a force 10 times larger. Admiral Voronak himself seemed amused by what he considered a pathetic bluff. "Admiral Wright," he replied with condescending politeness, "you are outnumbered 10 to 1. Your ships are primitive compared to Valkorian technology. I suggest you surrender now and spare your crews unnecessary suffering." Wright's expression didn't change. "You have 47 hours and 58 minutes, she said, "and cut the transmission." What happened next became known in galactic military circles as Operation Pyrrhic Victory, though it would be years before anyone understood the true meaning of that name. The human ships began moving through the system in seemingly random patterns, conducting what appeared to be reconnaissance sweeps of the asteroid belt and gas giant. Valkorian sensors tracked their movements, noting that they seemed to be scanning for something specific, but finding no obvious military purpose in their activities. Greg Miller commanded the human ship Defiant Dawn, which had been refitted since its last engagement with Valkorian forces. Intelligence intercepts revealed that Miller was coordinating with ground teams on Centauri Prime, though the nature of their communications remained encrypted and unreadable. Captain Linda Shaw had been given command of a new vessel called the Iron Resolve, replacing the ship she had sacrificed in the raid on the Vorhelm complex. Her ship was equipped with experimental systems that Valkorian scientists couldn't identify, technologies that seemed to bend the laws of physics in impossible ways. But the most concerning development was the behavior of the colonists on Centauri Prime itself. Instead of showing signs of panic or desperation, the population seemed to be engaged in some kind of organized evacuation. Orbital sensors detected massive movement of people and equipment, but the destinations remained unclear. Commander Pete Williams appeared to be coordinating the logistics of whatever the humans were planning. His transport ships moved constantly between the planet's surface and the outer system, carrying cargo that was carefully shielded from Valkorian scanners. The efficiency of the operation was impressive, moving 2 million people and their essential belongings in less than 2 days. Admiral Voronek grew increasingly suspicious as the 48-hour deadline approached. His intelligence staff reported that human activity was increasing rather than decreasing, with more ships arriving from deeper in their territory. But the newcomers weren't military vessels. They were converted civilian craft, modified with extra passenger compartments and life support systems. Captain Danny Ross commanded a human ship called the Last Stand, which took up position near the planet's main orbital facility. The vessel appeared to be some kind of command ship, bristling with communication arrays and sensor equipment. Ross himself was described in intelligence reports as a former merchant captain who had volunteered for what military analysts assumed was a suicide mission. The deadline arrived with Admiral Wright's fleet still maintaining their positions near the asteroid belt. Admiral Voronek prepared to demonstrate Valkorian power by ordering a limited bombardment of military targets on the planet's surface. But when his ships moved into bombardment formation, they found something that changed everything. Centauri Prime was empty. The orbital scans revealed abandoned cities, empty spaceports, and deserted industrial complexes. The entire population had vanished during the 2-day evacuation, leaving behind only automated systems and a few volunteer crews to maintain essential services. The humans had successfully evacuated 2 million people right under the noses of the largest fleet in galactic history. Admiral Voronek realized he had been outmaneuvered, but the situation grew worse when his fleet moved to occupy the abandoned orbital facilities. The humans had left behind more than empty buildings. They had created a trap on a scale that defied comprehension. Captain Ross transmitted the final message from the Last Stand as Valkorian forces approached the main orbital station. Admiral Wright sends her regards, he said, his voice calm and professional. She wants you to remember that humans always pay their debts. The detonation sequence began with the orbital facilities around Centauri Prime. Fusion charges that had been carefully placed throughout the infrastructure created a chain reaction that spread to the planet's atmosphere processors, the orbital refineries, and finally the planet's own core. The humans had turned an entire world into a weapon, but they hadn't stopped there. The asteroid belt that Admiral Wright's fleet had been scanning contained hidden fusion charges in thousands of asteroids. The gas giant's orbital platforms had been rigged with quantum destabilizers that turned the planet into a stellar furnace. Every piece of infrastructure in the system had been wired to explode simultaneously. The explosion was visible from neighboring star systems. The flash of light temporarily blinded sensor arrays across a dozen light years. When the radiation cleared, the Centauri system had become a stellar graveyard filled with the wreckage of over 1,500 Valkorian ships. Admiral Voronek's flagship survived the initial blast, protected by its heavy shields and distance from the planet. But the electromagnetic pulse from the explosion had crippled most of his fleet's systems. Ships drifted helplessly through space, their crews struggling to restore power and life support. Zithara found himself in an escape pod, watching through a small viewport as the human fleet emerged from the outer system. Admiral Wright's ships had been safely positioned beyond the blast zone, protected by knowledge of exactly when and where the explosions would occur. The human ships moved through the wreckage like predators, rescuing survivors and capturing disabled vessels. But they weren't cruel or vengeful. Zekthara spent 3 months as a prisoner aboard the human ship, Mercy's Light, before he truly understood what humanity had become. The ship was a converted medical vessel, now serving as a prison transport for captured Valkorian personnel. But it was unlike any military prison he had ever heard of. The human crew treated their prisoners with professional courtesy and genuine care. Medical officers provided treatment for injuries without regard to species or rank. The food was adequate. The quarters were clean, and the guards were polite but watchful. Captain Roy Phillips, the ship's commanding officer, made regular visits to ensure that prisoners were being treated according to what humans called the rules of war. But what disturbed Zekthara most was the calm efficiency with which the humans conducted their operations. There was no hatred in their voices when they spoke of Valkorian forces, no anger or desire for revenge. They treated the war like a job that needed to be finished, a problem that required a solution. After the disaster at Centauri Prime, the Valkorian fleet had scattered in confusion. Some ships retreated to friendly territory, others attempted to regroup at rally points, and a few tried to continue fighting independently. But the humans had anticipated all of these responses and prepared accordingly. Admiral Susan Blake commanded what the humans called the Long Hunt, a systematic campaign to eliminate every Valkorian military presence in human space and beyond. Her fleet was unlike anything seen in previous battles. The ships were larger, faster, and equipped with technologies that seemed to have advanced by decades in just a few months. But these weren't random attacks motivated by revenge. Every target was carefully selected based on military value and strategic importance. Commander Roy Phillips, who served as Blake's intelligence chief before taking command of the prison ship, had spent months analyzing Valkorian military infrastructure to identify the most critical nodes in their supply network. The first major strike came at the Kethmer shipyards, located deep in Valkorian territory. The facility had been building warships for 3 centuries and was considered one of the most secure installations in the hegemony. But human intelligence had mapped every approach route, every defensive system, and every vulnerability. Captain Alex Turner led the assault force that penetrated the shipyard's defenses. Turner had been a systems analyst before the war, specializing in computer networks and data security. Now he used those skills to coordinate cyber warfare attacks that disabled the facility's automated defenses while kinetic strikes destroyed the primary construction bays. The entire operation lasted less than 4 hours. When it was over, the Kethmer shipyards were a burning ruin, their production capacity eliminated for years to come. But the humans had taken care to evacuate civilian workers before the attack, demonstrating a level of precision and restraint that surprised Valkorian military observers. Similar strikes followed across Valkorian space. Supply depots, communication, relays, and military bases were hit with surgical precision, while civilian targets remained untouched. The message was clear. Humanity was not interested in conquest or genocide. They wanted to eliminate the Valkorian military's ability to threaten Earth and its colonies. Thera learned about these operations from the human guards on his prison ship. They spoke openly about their military's progress, showing none of the secrecy that would be expected in a Valkorian facility. When he asked why they were so willing to share information, Captain Phillips gave him an answer that still haunted his dreams. "Because it doesn't matter if you know," Phillips said with quiet confidence. "Even if you escaped and warned your people, there's nothing they could do to stop us. We've studied your military for 3 years. We know how you think, how you fight, how you make decisions. You have no secrets from us anymore." The truth of that statement became clear as the long hunt continued. Human forces seemed to anticipate every Valkorian countermove, every attempt at regrouping, every effort to establish new defensive positions. It was as if they could read the minds of enemy commanders and predict their actions days in advance. Dr. Jennifer Hayes led the Human Intelligence Analysis Division that made this level of prediction possible. She had been a behavioral psychologist before the war, studying decision-making processes and group dynamics. Now she applied those same techniques to military strategy, creating psychological profiles of enemy commanders that allowed human forces to predict their likely responses to any situation. The turning point came when the humans demonstrated their intelligence-gathering capabilities in the most dramatic way possible. Admiral Claire Johnson, commanding the human flagship Indomitable, will broadcast a message on all frequencies throughout Valkorian space. The transmission contained detailed information about every military installation, government facility, and strategic resource in the entire hegemony. Zithara watched the broadcast from the common area of his prison ship, surrounded by hundreds of other captured officers. The humans had provided accurate locations, defensive capabilities, personnel numbers, and command structures for installations that were supposed to be top secret. Some of the information was more current than what many Valkorian commanders had in their own files. "We know where you are," Admiral Johnson said, her voice calm and professional. "We know what you have, who commands it, and how you plan to use it. We know your supply routes, your communication codes, and your emergency procedures. We have been watching you, learning from you, and preparing for every possible scenario." The psychological impact was devastating. Valkorian forces throughout the galaxy realized that their enemy possessed complete intelligence about their operations. Every base was compromised, every secret was known, every plan was anticipated. The humans had achieved total information superiority, but Admiral Johnson's message contained more than just a demonstration of intelligence capabilities. It also included terms for ending the war. The conditions were surprisingly reasonable. Humanity demanded a formal ceasefire, recognition of their territorial sovereignty, and a commitment that Valkorian forces would never again threaten human space or any of humanity's allies. There were no demands for tribute, no requirements for territorial concessions, no insistence on cultural changes or political reforms. The humans simply wanted to be left alone to develop their civilization in peace, but the implicit threat was clear. Any future aggression would be met with the same ruthless efficiency that had characterized the entire war. Captain Turner, personally, delivered the peace proposal to the Valkorian High Command. He arrived at the Imperial capital aboard a single ship, carrying diplomatic credentials and a message from Admiral Johnson. The audacity of sending one vessel into the heart of enemy territory demonstrated humanity's confidence in their intelligence, network, and defensive capabilities. The negotiations lasted for 6 days. Zethara later learned the details from intelligence reports that were declassified after the war ended. The human delegation was led by Ambassador Lisa Wong, the same diplomat who had visited Turval Station 3 years earlier. She was accompanied by Captain Turner and a small staff of military advisors. Ambassador Wong approached the negotiations with the same professional competence she had shown during first contact. She was polite, patient, and well-informed about Valkorian culture and legal traditions. But she was also inflexible on the core terms. Humanity would accept nothing less than complete security for their territory and their allies. The Valkorian High Command found themselves in an impossible position. Continuing the war meant facing an enemy that knew their every move and could strike at will. But accepting the peace terms meant acknowledging that a supposedly primitive species had defeated the greatest military power in galactic history. Admiral Voronok, the architect of the original invasion, spoke for many when he addressed the peace conference. "How did we lose to creatures we dismissed as barely civilized?" he asked, his voice heavy with confusion and defeat. Captain Turner provided an answer that would be quoted in military academies for generations to come. "You assume that technology determines victory," he said. "But wars are won by adaptation, determination, and the willingness to pay whatever price victory requires. We learned your technology, improved upon it, and used it better than you did. We studied your tactics, found their weaknesses, and developed counters for every strategy you employed. Most importantly, we fought for our survival, while you fought for your convenience. The peace treaty was signed on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 years after the war had begun. The ceremony took place aboard a neutral space station with representatives from dozens of galactic civilizations serving as witnesses. Ambassador Wong signed for humanity, while Admiral Voronak signed for the Valkorian hegemony. As the documents were exchanged, Zekthara found himself thinking about the lessons of the war. Humanity had demonstrated that technological superiority meant nothing without the will and wisdom to use it effectively. They had shown that determination and adaptability could overcome any advantage of numbers or firepower, but most importantly, they had proven that some prices were too high to pay. For conquest, the humans had been willing to sacrifice entire worlds rather than surrender their freedom.